Oh, hello and good evening. Happy holidays to you and yours, and welcome to Shakespeare Talk. I am your host, Sherlock Mulberry, and this evening we'll be talking about Shakespeare's great work, Comedy of Errors. Our story begins with Aegeon, a merchant from Syracuse, apprehended in Ephesus and condemned to death for violating a law that does not permit commerce and travel between the two cities. And the only way our hero can avoid the penalty is to ransom his life for 100 marks, amount of money he neither has nor any way of raising. Now, Solinus, the Duke of Ephesus, asked the old man why he was traveling into this hostile city, and Aegeon responds with his very sad tale. Now, Aegeon and his wife Amelia had two sons, twin sons that is, both named Antipholus. The husband and wife decided that they would have two slaves for their sons, both twins as well, and both named Dromio. In a horrid shipwreck several years earlier, the family was separated. Aegeon with one twin son and his slave were rescued by one ship, and his wife and the other two rescued by another. 18 years later, Antipholus, raised by Aegeon, left Syracuse along with his slave Dromio to search the world over for his lost twin brother. When Antipholus and Dromio did not return after 5 years, his aged father set out on his own search, wandering vainly, only to be arrested and condemned to death in Ephesus on his way home. Okay, just so you're following, you have Aegeon and Amelia here. These are the parents. They have two kids. The kids are twins, both named Antipholus. They're here. Now the parents get this bright idea: we should have slaves for our kids. So they purchase two other kids, also twins, that will serve as slaves for these two here. So you have these two Dromios and these Antipholuses. And so what they do is they say, oh, you Antipholus 1, you get a slave. Antipholus 2, you get a slave. So they take a slave, they bring one slave here, bring her over with this slave here. So see, you have Aegeon and Amelia, Antipholus 1, Dromio 1, Antipholus 2, Dromio 2, and this is our story. And then you get this horrid shipwreck. Horrid. And the ship, it's driving, sailing, whatever you may be, it crashes. And the two separated, right? Two separated. So that's where we're at now. You got all that, right? Alright, so we'll continue on here now. Continuing on. After hearing the sad tale, Duke Solinus is moved and offers Aegeon one more day to receive the money required for freedom. Now meanwhile, unbeknownst to any of the other characters, Antipholus of Syracuse arrives in Ephesus with his slave Dromio of Syracuse. Also unbeknownst to anybody is the fact that Antipholus of Ephesus, which is the other Antipholus, is already living in the city with his wife Adriana and the other slave Dromio of Ephesus. So now the stage is set for our series of comedic errors. The first being the meeting between Antipholus of Syracuse and Dromio of Ephesus. Now this is not a pleasant meeting, as Antipholus of Syracuse absolutely beats Dromio of Ephesus to a bloody pulp. I mean, really gives him the business. And the reason he does so is because Dromio of Ephesus tries to get this Antipholus, who is his wrong master, to go home with him for dinner. And that doesn't sit too well with the Antipholus of Syracuse, so he gives him the business. Oh, it's nicely done there with that illustration, great acting. Now, our second event of a series of comedic errors is when Adriana locks her real husband out of his home because she's already in the house with his confused twin, Antipholus of Syracuse, who she assumes is her real husband. It's just a true mix-up here. And again, demonstrating this will be our great and talented actors. Here they are.
Adriana, I have returned from my journey. Hello.
You can't come in, you liar.
What? What are you talking about?
You're lying. I already have you inside.
What? It's not possible. I'm standing here.
The real Antipholus is already inside.
The real Antipholus?
You're
Physically,
lying.
there cannot be another Antipholus.
Our next unfortunate event is when Antipholus of Ephesus refused to pay Angelo, the local goldsmith, for a chain he ordered. Thinking he did not receive it because the chain was delivered to his surprised twin. Now, Angelo, being very upset of this, wants his money, and Antipholus of Ephesus being arrested. Now, as a result of this, Dromio of Syracuse, who at this time was being accused of being responsible, was beaten by Antipholus of Ephesus, who again was the wrong master. Okay, so at this point in the story, things are getting more and more crazy, and everybody believes everybody else has gone mad. And so we're here at this story where you have Aegon's execution coming ever so more closer, and you have this Antipholus of Ephesus, who feels he was wronged by the whole chain incident. So Antipholus of Ephesus travels to the Duke, upset about the whole chain incident, and what happens next is just wild. So I'll have our actors show you what happens next here. Antipholus, 'tis you. I'm safe. It's Antipholus, help.
Who are you? And why
Oh,
are
I'm
you...
your father, Antipholus.
My father.
I'm your father, yes.
I lost him in a shipwreck. You physically...
Yes,
sorry.
that's me, Antipholus.
Sorry.
Give me.
I'm sorry.
Antipholus. Oh. Okay, so our story comes to the point where you have Antipholus and Dromio of Syracuse taking refuge in this abbey, which is a monastery, abbey if you will, and as they emerge, they are encountered by the other two twins and Aegon. It's a grand reunion. They're all so glad and happy. It's a grand reunion. The father finds not only one of his sons, but both sons. And the surprise is sprinkled with more delight when an abbess, or a nun, if you will, working at the monastery, comes out and says, "Hey, I'm Amelia, your wife, Aegon. I've been living in disguise, and I'm your wife." So now you have Aegon found both twins, both sons, both slave twins, both Dromios, and his wife. And so the family lives happily ever after, and it's just a grand end. Everything's peachy in the end of the story. So that wraps up our story. I just want to thank all of our listeners, the producing cast, our wonderful actors this evening at Shakespeare Talks. I really appreciate all donations and your contributions. Thanks for listening. Tonight's episode was Comedy of Errors by William Shakespeare. I'm Sherlock Mulberry. Have a very happy holidays, and thanks again for listening.